Hi library friends, it's Miss Abby. Welcome back for another episode of Read Aloud Roundup. Now remember, this is kind of like a book club where we read a little bit from a lot of books by the same author, and it gives you kind of a flavor or a taste of what their writing is like. If you like what you hear, then you can go to the library and read the rest of the book that I started reading to you, and let me know. Is this the kind of book you like? Let's read more. This month, we're focusing on Neil Gaiman, who's one of my favorite authors. Last week, we read part of Odd and the Frost Giants, which is a real kind of interesting, magical Norse mythology story. Very different from the first book that we read, right? Fortunately, the Milk. But a lot of Neil's books have some kind of mystical element to them, and that's something that they all kind of have in common that I really enjoy. The next book that we're reading is kind of a spooky book. So if you don't really like scary stories, this would be a week to maybe skip it or, listen, because the first couple pages aren't that spooky, and it's actually nice to get a little taste of a book before you read too much into it and realize this book is too scary for me. The book that we're reading this week is Coraline. I'm excited. Let's get started. Coraline by Neil Gaiman. Now this edition has illustrations by Dave McKean, but there are all kinds of editions out there. 1. Coraline discovered the door a little while after they moved into the house. It was a very old house. It had an attic under the roof, and a cellar under the ground, and an overgrown garden with huge old trees in it. Coraline's family didn't own all of the house. It was too big for that. Instead, they owned part of it. There were other people who lived in the old house. Miss Spink and Miss Forcible lived in the flat below Coraline's on the ground floor. They were both old and round, and they lived in their flat with a number of aging Highland Terriers who had names like Hamish and Andrew and Jock. Once upon a time, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible had been actresses, as Miss Spink told Coraline the first time she met her. "You see, Caroline," Miss Spink said, getting Coraline's name wrong, "both myself and Miss Forcible were famous actresses in our time. We trod the boards, lovey. Oh, don't let Hamish eat the fruitcake, or he'll be up all night with his tummy." "It's Coraline, not Caroline." "Coraline," said Coraline. In the flat above Coraline's, under the roof, was a crazy old man with a big mustache. He told Coraline that he was training a mouse circus. He wouldn't let anyone see it. "One day, little Caroline, when they're all ready, everyone in the whole world will see the wonders of my mouse circus. You ask me why you cannot see it now? Is that what you asked me?" "No," said Coraline quietly. "I asked you not to call me Caroline. It's Coraline." "The reason you cannot see the mouse circus," said the man upstairs, "is that the mice are not yet ready and rehearsed. Also, they refuse to play the songs I have written for them. All the songs I have written for the mice to play go oompa, oompa, but the mice will only play doodle-doodle like that. I am thinking of trying them on different type of cheese." Coraline didn't think there really was a mouse circus. She thought the old man was probably making it up. Do you think there's a mouse circus? Seems a little improbable, right? Right. The day after they moved in, Coraline went exploring. She explored the garden. It was a big garden. At the very back was an old tennis court, but no one in the house played tennis, and the fence around the court had holes in it, and the net had mostly rotted away. There was an old rose garden filled with stunted, fly-blown rose bushes. There was a rockery that was all rocks. There was a fairy ring made of squidgy brown toadstools, which smelled dreadful if you accidentally trod on them. There was also a well. On the first day Coraline's family moved in, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible made a point of telling Coraline how dangerous the well was, and they warned her to be sure she kept away from it. So Coraline set off to explore for it, so that she knew where it was, to keep away from it properly. She found it on the third day in an overgrown meadow beside the tennis court, behind a clump of trees, a low brick circle almost hidden in the high grass. The well had been covered up by wooden boards to stop anyone falling in. There was a small knothole on one of the boards, and Coraline spent an afternoon dropping pebbles and acorns through the hole and waiting and counting until she heard the as it hit the water far below. Coraline also explored for animals. She found a hedgehog and a snake, skin, but no snake, and a rock that looked just like a frog, and a toad that looked just like a rock. Cool. There was also a haughty black cat who sat on walls and tree stumps and watched her, but slipped away if she ever went over to try to play with it. That was how she spent her first 2 weeks in the house, exploring the garden and the grounds. Her mother made her come back inside for dinner and lunch, and Coraline had to make sure she dressed up warm before she went out, for it was a very cold summer. No thanks. But go out she did, exploring every day until the day it rained, when Coraline had to stay inside. "What should I do?" asked Coraline. "Read a book," said her mother. "Watch a video, play with your toys, go and pester Miss Spink or Miss Forceful or the crazy old man upstairs." "No," said Coraline, "I don't want to do those things. I want to explore." "I don't really mind what you do," said Coraline's mother, "as long as you don't make a mess." Coraline went over to the window and watched the rain come down. It wasn't the kind of rain you could go out in. It was the other kind, the kind that threw itself down from the sky and splashed where it landed. It was rain that meant business, and currently its business was turning the garden into a muddy, wet soup. Ugh, no thank you. Coraline had watched all the videos. She was bored with her toys, and she'd read all of her books. She turned on the television. She went from channel to channel to channel, but there was nothing on but men in suits talking about the stock market and talk shows. Ugh, boring. Eventually, she found something to watch. It was the last half of a natural history program about something called protective coloration. She watched animals, birds, and insects which disguised themselves as leaves or twigs or other animals to escape from things that could hurt them. She enjoyed it, but it ended too soon and was followed by a program about a cake factory. It was time to talk to her father. Coraline's father was home. Both of her parents worked doing things on computers, which meant that they were home a lot of the time. Each of them had their own study. "Hello, Coraline," he said when she came in, without turning around. Said Coraline. "It's raining." "Yup," said her father, "it's bucketing down." "No," said Coraline, "it's just raining. Can I go outside?" "What does your mother say?" "She says not to. You're not going out in weather like that, Coraline Jones?" "Then no." "But I want to carry on exploring." "Then explore the flat," suggested her father. "Look, here's a piece of paper and a pen. Count all the doors and windows, list everything blue, mount an expedition to discover the hot water tank, and leave me alone to work." Does that sound familiar? Yeah. "Can I go into the drawing room?" The drawing room was where the Joneses kept the expensive and uncomfortable furniture Coraline's grandmother had left them when she died. Coraline wasn't allowed in there. Nobody went in there. It was only for best. If you don't make a mess, and you don't touch anything. Coraline considered this carefully. Then she took the paper and pen and went off to explore the inside of the flat. She discovered the hot water tank. It was in a cupboard in the kitchen. She counted everything blue, 153. She counted the windows, 21. She counted the doors, 14. Of the doors that she found, 13 opened and closed. The other, a big carved brown wooden door at the far corner of the drawing room, was locked. She said to her mother, "Where does that door go?" "Nowhere, dear. It has to go somewhere." Her mother shook her head. "Look," she told Coraline. She reached up and took a string of keys from the top of the kitchen door frame. She sorted through them carefully and selected the oldest, biggest, blackest, rustiest key. Then she went into the drawing room. She unlocked the door with the key. The door swung open. Her mother was right. The door didn't go anywhere. It opened onto a brick wall. When this place was just one house, said Coraline's mother, the door went somewhere. When they turned this house into flats, they simply bricked it up. The other side is the empty flat on the other side of the house, the one that's still for sale. She shut the door and put the string of black keys on top of the kitchen door frame. "You didn't lock it," said Coraline. Her mother shrugged. "Why should I lock it?" She said. "It doesn't go anywhere." Coraline didn't say anything. "Oh, that's a little foreboding, huh?" It was nearly dark outside now, and the rain was still coming down, pattering against the windows and blurring the lights of the cars on the street outside. Coraline's father stopped working and made them all dinner. Coraline was disgusted. "Daddy," she said, "you've made a recipe again." "It's leek and potato stew with a tarragon garnish and melted Gruyere cheese," he admitted. Coraline sighed. Then she went to the freezer and got out some microwave chips and a microwave mini pizza. "You know I don't like recipes," she told her father, while her dinner went round and around and the little red numbers on the microwave oven counted down to 0. "If you tried it, maybe you'd like it," said Coraline's father, but she shook her head. That night, Coraline lay awake in her bed. The rain had stopped, and she was almost asleep when something went tut-tut-tut. She sat up in bed. Something went creak. Coraline got out of bed and looked down the hall, but saw nothing strange. She walked down the hall. From her parents' bedroom came a low snoring. That was her father, and an occasional sleeping mutter. That was her mother. Coraline wondered if she'd dreamed it, whatever it was. Something moved. It was a little more than a shadow, and it scuttled down the darkened hall fast, like a little patch of night. She hoped it wasn't a spider. Spiders made Coraline intensely uncomfortable. The black shape went into the drawing room, and Coraline followed it a little nervously. Ooh, would you be nervous following a little dark shape running down your hallway? I think I would be. The room was dark. The only light came from the hall, and Coraline, who was standing in the doorway, cast a huge and distorted shadow into the drawing room carpet. She looked like a thin, giant woman. Coraline was just wondering whether or not she ought to turn on the lights when she saw the black shape edge slowly out from beneath the sofa. It paused and then dashed silently across the carpet towards the farthest corner of the room. There was no furniture in that corner of the room. Coraline turned on the light. There was nothing in the corner. Nothing but the old door that opened onto the brick wall. She was sure that her mother had shut that door, but now it was ever so slightly open. Just a crack. Coraline went over to it and looked in. There was nothing there, just a wall built of red bricks. Coraline closed the old wooden door, turned out the light, and went to bed. She dreamed of black shapes that slid from place to place, avoiding the light, until they were all gathered together under the moon. Little black shapes with little red eyes and sharp yellow teeth. Ooh, spooky. They started to sing, spookier. "We are small, but we are many. We are many, we are small. We were here before you rose. We will be here when you fall." Ooh. Their voices were high and whispering and slightly whiny. They made Coraline feel uncomfortable. Then Coraline dreamed a few commercials, and after that, she dreamed of nothing at all. 2. The next day it had stopped raining, but a thick white fog had lowered over the house. "I'm going for a walk," said Coraline. "Don't go too far," said her mother, "and dress up warmly." Coraline put on her blue coat with a hood, her red scarf, and her yellow Wellington boots. She went out. Miss Spink was walking her dogs. "Hello, Caroline," said Miss Spink. "Rotten weather." "Yes," said Coraline. "I played Portia once," said Miss Spink. "Miss Forcible talks about her Ophelia, but it was my Portia they came to see when we trod the boards." Miss Spink was bundled up in pullovers and cardigans, so she seemed more small and circular than ever. She looked like a large, fluffy egg. That's a silly image. She wore thick glasses that made her eyes seem huge. "They used to send flowers to my dressing room. They did," she said. You see her with her puffy outfit on. "Who did?" asked Coraline. Miss Spink looked around cautiously, looking over first one shoulder and then the other, peering into the mist as though someone might be listening. "Men," she whispered. Then she tugged the dogs to heel and waddled off back toward the house. Coraline continued to walk. She was 3/4 of the way around the house when she saw Miss Forcible standing at the door to the flat she shared with Miss Spink. "Have you seen Miss Spink, Caroline?" Coraline told her that she had, and that Miss Spink was out walking the dogs.
I do hope she doesn't get lost. It'll bring on her shingles if she does. You'll see, said Miss Forcible. You would have to be an explorer to find your way around in this fog.
I am an explorer, said Coraline.
Of course you are, lovey, said Miss Forcible. Don't get lost now.
Coraline continued walking through the gardens in the gray mist. She always kept in sight of the house. After about 10 minutes of walking, she found herself back where she had started. The hair over her eyes was limp and wet, and her face felt damp. "Ahoy! Caroline!" said the crazy old man upstairs. "Oh, hello," said Coraline. She could hardly see the old man through the mist. He walked down the steps on the outside of the house that led up past Coraline's front door and to the door of his flat. He walked down very slowly. Coraline waited at the bottom of the stairs. "The mice do not like the mist," he told her. "It makes their whiskers droop." "I don't much like the mist either," admitted Coraline. The old man leaned down so close that the bottoms of his mustache tickled Coraline's ear. "The mice have a message for you," he whispered. Coraline didn't know what to say. "The message is this. Don't go through the door." He paused. "Does that mean anything to you?" "No," said Coraline. The old man shrugged. "They're funny, the mice. They get things wrong. They got your name wrong, you know. They kept saying Coraline, not Caroline. Not Caroline at all." He picked up a milk bottle from the bottom of the stairs and started back up to his attic flat. Coraline went indoors. Her mother was working in her study. Her mother's study smelled of flowers. "What shall I do?" asked Coraline. "When do you go back to school?" asked her mother. "Next week," said Coraline. Said her mother. "I suppose I shall have to get you new school clothes. Remind me, dear, or else I'll forget." And she went back to typing things on the computer screen. "What shall I do?" repeated Coraline. "Draw something." Her mother passed her a sheet of paper and a ballpoint pen. Coraline tried drawing the mist. After 10 minutes of drawing, she still had a white sheet of paper with mist. How do you draw the mist? That's a good question. Written in one corner in slightly wiggly letters. She grunted and passed it to her mother. Very modern, dear," said Coraline's mother. Coraline crept into the drawing room and tried to open the old door in the corner. It was locked once more. She supposed her mother must have locked it again. She shrugged. Coraline went to see her father. He had his back to the door as he typed. "Go away," he said cheerfully as she walked in. "I'm bored," she said. "Learn how to tap dance," he suggested, without turning around. Coraline shook her head. "Why don't you play with me?" she asked. "Busy," he said. "Working," he added. He still hadn't turned around to look at her. "Why don't you go bother Miss Spink and Miss Forcible?" Coraline put on her coat and pulled up her hood and went out of the house. She went downstairs. She rang the door of Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's flat. Coraline could hear the frenzied woofing as the Scotty dogs ran out into the hall. After a while, Miss Spink opened the door. "Oh, it's you, Caroline," she said. "Angus, Hamish, Bruce, down now, lovies. It's only Caroline. Come in, dear. Would you like a cup of tea?" The flat smelled of furniture polish and dogs. "Yes, please," said Coraline. Miss Spink led her into a dusty little room, which she called the parlor. On the walls were black and white photographs of pretty women and theater programs in frames. Miss Forcible was sitting in one of the armchairs, knitting hard. They poured Coraline a cup of tea with a little pink bone china cup with a saucer. They gave her a dry Garibaldi biscuit to go with it. When they say biscuit, usually in British books, they mean cookie. Miss Forcible looked at Miss Spink, picked up her knitting, and took a deep breath. "Anyway, April, as I was saying, you still have to admit there's life in the old dog yet." "Miriam, dear, neither of us is as young as we were." "Madame Arcati," replied Miss Forcible, "the nurse in Romeo, Lady Bracknell, character parts, they can't retire you from the stage." "Now, Miriam, we agreed," said Miss Spink. Coraline wondered if they'd forgotten she was there. They weren't making much sense. She decided they were having an argument as old and comfortable as an armchair. The kind of argument that no one ever really wins or loses, but which can go on forever if both parties are willing. She sipped her tea. "I'll read the leaves if you want," she said, Miss Spink to Coraline. "Sorry?" said Coraline. "The tea leaves, dear. I'll read your future." Coraline passed Miss Spink her cup. Miss Spink peered short-sightedly at the black tea leaves in the bottom. She pursed her lips. "You know, Caroline," she said after a while, "you're in terrible danger." Miss Forcible snorted and put down her knitting. "Don't be silly, April. Stop scaring the girl. Your eyes are going. Pass me that cup, child." Coraline carried the cup over to Miss Forcible. Miss Forcible looked into it carefully, shook her head, and looked into it again. "Oh dear," she said. "You were right, April. She is in danger." "See, Miriam," said Miss Spink triumphantly. "My eyes are as good as they ever were." "What am I in danger from?" asked Coraline. Mrs. Spink and Forcible stared at her blankly. "It didn't say," said Miss Spink. "Tea leaves aren't reliable for that kind of thing. Not really. They're good for general, but not for specifics." "What should I do then?" asked Coraline, who was slightly alarmed by this. "Don't wear green in your dressing room," suggested Miss Spink. "Or mention the Scottish play," added Miss Forcible. Coraline wondered why so few of the adults she had made any sense. She sometimes wondered who they thought they were talking to. "And be very, very careful," said Miss Spink. She got up from the armchair and went over to the fireplace. On the mantelpiece was a small jar, and Miss Spink took off the top of the jar and began to pull things out of it. There was a tiny china duck, a thimble, a strange little brass coin, 2 paper clips, and a stone with a hole in it. She passed Coraline the stone with a hole in it. "What's it for?" asked Coraline. The hole went all the way through the middle of the stone. She held it up to the window and looked through it. "It might help," said Miss Spink. "They're good for bad things sometimes." Coraline put on her coat, said goodbye to Mrs. Spink and Forcible, and to the dogs, and went outside. The mist hung like blindness around the house. She walked slowly to the stairs up to her family's flat, and then stopped and looked around. In the mist, it was a ghost world. "In danger?" thought Coraline to herself. It sounded exciting. It didn't sound like a bad thing. Not really. Coraline went back upstairs, her fist closed tightly around her new stone. 3. Oh, we're just going to do a tiny chunk of 3, okay? Because it gets really good. The next day, the sun shone, and Coraline's mother took her into the nearest large town to buy clothes for school. They dropped her father off at the railway station. He was going into London for the day to see some people. Coraline waved him goodbye. They went to the department store to buy the school clothes. Coraline saw some day-glow green gloves she liked a lot. Her mother refused to buy them for her, preferring instead to buy white socks, navy blue school underpants, 4 gray blouses, and a dark gray skirt. "But Mom, everybody at school's got gray blouses and everything. Nobody's got green gloves. I could be the only one." Her mother ignored her. She was talking to the shop assistant. They were talking about which kind of sweater to get for Coraline, and were agreeing that the best thing to do would be to get the one that was embarrassingly large and baggy, in the hopes that one day she might grow into it. Coraline wandered off and looked at a display of Wellington boots shaped like frogs and ducks and rabbits. Then she wandered back. "Coraline, oh, there you are. Where on earth were you?" "I was kidnapped by aliens," said Coraline. "They came down from outer space with ray guns, but I fooled them by wearing a wig and laughing in a foreign accent, and I escaped." "Yes, dear. Now I think you could do with some more hair clips, don't you?" "No." "Well, let's say half a dozen, to be on the safe side," said her mother. Coraline didn't say anything. In the car on the way back home, Coraline said, "What's in the empty flat?" "I don't know. Nothing, I expect. It probably looks like our flat before we moved in. Empty rooms? Do you think you could get into it from our flat?" "Not unless you can walk through bricks, dear." "Oh." They got home around lunchtime. The sun was shining, although the day was cold. Coraline's mother looked in the fridge and found a sad little tomato and a piece of cheese with green stuff growing on it. There was only a crust in the bread bin. I'd better dash down to the shops and get some fish fingers or something, said her mother. Do you want to come? No, said Coraline. Suit yourself, said her mother, and left. Then she came back and got her purse and car keys and went out again. Coraline was bored. She flipped through a book her mother was reading about native people in a distant country, how every day they would take pieces of white silk and draw on them in wax, then dip the silks in dye, then draw on them more in wax and dye them some more, then boil the wax out in hot water, and then finally throw the now beautiful cloths on a fire and burn them to ashes. It seemed particularly pointless to Coraline, but she hoped that the people enjoyed it. She was still bored, and her mother wasn't yet home. Coraline got a chair and pushed it over to the kitchen door. She climbed onto the chair and reached up. She got down, then got a broom from the broom cupboard. She climbed back on the chair and reached up with the broom. Chink! She climbed down from the chair and picked up the keys. She smiled triumphantly. Then she leaned the broom against the wall and went into the drawing room. What do you think she's going to do? The family did not use the drawing room. They had inherited the furniture from Coraline's grandmother, along with a wooden coffee table, a side table, a heavy glass ashtray, and the oil painting of a bowl of fruit. Sounds cool. Coraline could never work out why anyone would want to paint a bowl of fruit. Other than that, the room was empty. There were no knickknacks on the mantelpiece, no statues or clocks, nothing that made it feel comfortable or lived in. The old black key felt colder than any of the others. She pushed it into the keyhole. It turned smoothly with a satisfying clunk. Coraline stopped and listened. She knew she was doing something wrong, and she was trying to listen for her mother coming back, but she heard nothing. Then Coraline put her hand on the doorknob and turned it, and finally she opened the door. It opened onto a dark hallway. The bricks had gone, as if they'd never been there. There was a cold, musty smell coming through the open doorway. It smelled like something very old and very slow. Coraline went through the door. She wondered what the empty flat would be like, if that was where the corridor led. Coraline walked down the corridor uneasily. There was something very familiar about it. The carpet beneath her feet was the same carpet they had in her flat. The wallpaper was the same wallpaper they had. The picture hanging in the hall was the same that they had hanging in their hallway at home. She knew where she was. She was in her own home. She hadn't left. She shook her head, confused. She stared at the picture hanging on the wall. No, it wasn't exactly the same. The picture they had in their own hallway showed a boy in old-fashioned clothes staring at some bubbles, but now the expression on his face was different. He was looking at the bubbles as if he was planning to do something very nasty indeed to them, and there was something peculiar about his eyes. Coraline stared at his eyes, trying to figure out what exactly was different. She almost had it when somebody said, "Coraline?" It sounded like her mother. Coraline went into the kitchen where the voice had come from. A woman stood in the kitchen with her back to Coraline. She looked a little like Coraline's mother, only her skin was white as paper. Only she was taller and thinner. Only her fingers were too long, and they never stopped moving, and her dark red fingernails were curved and sharp. "Coraline," the woman said, "is that you?" And then she turned around. Her eyes were big black buttons. "Lunchtime, Coraline," said the woman. "Who are you?" asked Coraline. "I'm your other mother," said the woman. "Go and tell your other father that lunch is ready." She opened the door of the oven. Suddenly, Coraline realized how hungry she was. It smelled wonderful. "Well, go on." Coraline went down the hall to where her father's study was. She opened the door. There was a man in there sitting at the keyboard with his back to her. "Hello," said Coraline. I mean, she said to say that lunch is ready." The man turned around. His eyes were buttons, big and black and shiny. "Hello, Coraline," he said. "I'm starving." He got up and went with her into the kitchen. They sat at the kitchen table, and Coraline's other mother brought them lunch. A huge, golden brown roasted chicken, fried potatoes, tiny green peas. Coraline shoveled the food into her mouth. It tasted wonderful.
"We've been waiting for you a long time," said Coraline's other father.
"For me?" "Yes," said the other mother. "It wasn't the same here without you, but we knew you'd arrive one day, and then we could be a proper family. Would you like some more chicken?" Whoo! And that's where we're gonna stop. Oh boy. So, what do you think about that story so far? There's a lot of foreshadowing in the beginning. There's the mice telling her, don't go through the door. Oh boy. So from here, what do you think's gonna happen? Make a prediction, and then run to your library and check it out. And let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. See you next time.